Well, at the time of its completion in 2017, the Hornsdale Power Reserve became the world's largest lithium-ion battery. And after it and others repeatedly proved their worth, a host of large-scale and distributed battery projects have been installed right around Australia, making the country one of the leading markets globally for battery energy storage systems. But it's not all been good news. In July of this year, a fire broke out at the Victorian Big Battery near Geelong, and it's brought into focus the vital need to ensure battery system quality, safety, and reliability. I'm Jonathan Gifford, the Editor-in-Chief of PV Magazine Global, and welcome to this Insight Australia event. I'm really pleased to be joined by my co-MC, my co-moderator today, Bella Peacock, an editor with PV Magazine Australia. Bella, hello to you.
Hello, Jonathan. Thank you. It's so great to be here. So we've got a really exciting program today. To name just some of the highlights, we'll be presenting the findings of the investigation into the Victorian Big Battery fire, along with PV Magazine's inquiries to local fire and emergency services. We'll also be hearing about the process of lithium-ion battery thermal runaway events and promising battery chemistries with safety in mind. We're bringing together two experts from the insurance sector to look at managing risk and how it can help with attracting finance. We'll also be convening two panel discussions with industry experts and leading researchers to discuss battery system safety on both the utility scale and the distributed level.
And of course, we want you to get involved in the discussion today. Thanks so much for attending. Thank you for your interest, and please be a part of our discussion. You can send through your questions and comments in the Q&A tab in the menu bar to the right of this virtual stage under the word chat. And you've also got the option either to submit your own questions or upvote the ones asked by others. My first question for you, however, is whereabouts are you joining us from? Either what part of Australia or anywhere in the world. Please let us know. Click on chat and be a part of the discussion. Of course, thank you very much to our Inside Australia partners, Ariel Ray, Enphase, Fronius, Shoals, and Stäubli. And thanks to all our ongoing partnership with All Energy Australia. And I encourage you to get involved with their online program over the next few weeks. If you encounter any technical problems throughout the event, let us know via the chat. Our team is standing by to help you. And we're also having a short break in the middle of this program, so you can actually do some virtual networking right here on this app. So that's another way to get involved. But let's get going with our program. Bella.
All right, let's kick things off. Opening the event, we have the Western Australian Minister for Energy, Mines and Petroleum, Bill Johnston. Mr. Johnston was the Shadow Minister of Energy from 2012 to 2017, before moving into the ministerial position in 2018. During that decade, the island grid of Western Australia has powered ahead to lead the country in rolling out standalone power systems, which primarily combine solar with battery storage. It's proven so successful for the state that the government plans to deploy another 1,000 systems in the next 4 years to service regional customers, effectively creating islands within the island grid. It's also home to the pioneering Onslow microgrid, which has seen the coastal Pilbara town run purely on renewables. Western Australia will soon welcome its first big battery in Kwinana, and it also has more than a dozen community batteries installed. The state has allocated millions in funding to pilot virtual power plants in the state. Unfortunately, since Western Australia's Parliament is sitting right now as we speak, the Minister isn't able to join us live, but he's left us these comments.
Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm speaking from, the Whadjuk Noongar people. I acknowledge their elders past and present and respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to this region. Thank you to the conference organisers for the invitation to talk today on this very important topic. Batteries will be increasingly important in the future, and it's critical there is confidence in their safety. Similar to other countries, Australia's energy sector is experiencing a rapid transformation. The rapid uptake of rooftop solar and developments in storage and electric vehicles present opportunities and risks. This is why the McGowan government established the Energy Transformation Task Force. to support the transition to a greener energy future. An important part of the transition is integrating batteries into the electricity system. This has been guided by the Task Force Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap. The roadmap is the first of its kind, receiving much praise from across Australia and internationally. Implementation of the roadmap is well underway, with 12 powerbank community batteries being deployed to support the system. A 100 megawatt battery is also being developed in Kwinana in Perth South. This will be bigger than 20 tennis courts and have the capacity to power 160,000 homes for 2 hours. The big battery will support the integration of more renewable energy and improve grid security. Tariff trials are also being run to encourage the most efficient use of our daytime solar supply. New technology pilots are being undertaken to integrate rooftop solar and battery storage via virtual power plants. We've amended our wholesale market rules to make it easier for new technologies to participate in the power system. We've commenced rolling out standalone power systems which are more cost-effective and reliable than traditional poles and wires. These power systems rely on the effective integration of batteries. We've committed to installing over 1,000 of these systems across the state. These will improve power supply to regional customers and reduce bushfire risks by removing long poles and wires. The McGowan government released its first Future Battery Industry Strategy in 2019. It responds to global challenges and emerging opportunities for Western Australia to host a world-leading battery industry. Recent modelling forecast Australia's battery industry will contribute $4.1 billion and 18,000 jobs by 2030. We're now starting to see batteries integrated into remote mining power supplies in the state. High heat is a critical safety issue for the broad uptake of these batteries. As with any new technology, gaps still exist with standards and some risks remain to be addressed. Government agencies need to continue to work with the industry to address gaps in these standards and ensure safety is a priority. The challenge isn't simple, but the opportunities to innovate and invest are there. I hope you will accept the challenge to unlock the potential of batteries in our energy transition. It's an exciting time to be in the energy industry.
Phil Johnston there, the Minister for Energy, Mines and Petroleum in Western Australia. In the second half of today's program, we'll hear a keynote address from the renowned Alka Höxter, who'll be speaking about how and why batteries will transform our energy systems. But before we go there, let's head from the west to the south of Australia now. South Australia is clearly a renewable energy trailblazer. It became the first state in the world to meet 100% of its electricity demand through solar in October of last year. And it sourced just shy of 60% of its electricity through clean energy in 2020. It's on track to reach its target of net 100% renewables well before 2030, and it has its sights set on 500% by 2050. We now have the privilege of speaking directly to South Australia's Director of Major Projects from the Department of Energy and Mining, Scott Oster. Scott came into the department just after the Hornsdale Power Reserve came online. His entrance coincided with the launch of the state's home battery scheme, the world's largest per capita. This scheme has made South Australia an obvious place to introduce virtual power plants, or VPPs. Scott managed South Australia's VPP project before moving into his role as director. We have the unique opportunity now to ask Scott questions directly. So please post your questions on the platform. We really want to hear from you, and it's such a good opportunity. And while we're waiting for those to roll in, I'll kick things off. Hello, Scott. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon. Good morning, Bella. How are you? Afternoon all.
Everyone's in different time zones, so it's mighty confusing. But I think I'm here with you. We're both in the afternoon.
Great.
All right. So I'll just kick things off. The success of the Hornsdale Big Battery has really changed the outlook for large-scale storage in South Australia and also the rest of Australia. How much room is there in the South Australian market for more big batteries?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Look, the Hornsdale Power Reserve has been a great success for South Australia, and I guess broadly the national grid as well. For those of the listeners or participants out there that may not be familiar with the asset, just to provide a little bit of background, it's a grid-scale battery storage facility in the north of South Australia, about 3 hours drive from Adelaide, and co-located with a 99 turbine and 316 megawatt wind farm. Delivered by Tesla and operated by Neoen. So it's a significant asset that we're really proud of. What started out as a 100 megawatt 129 megawatt hour battery in late 2017 has now been expanded with support of the South Australian Government's Grid Scale Storage Fund, as well as funding from CEFC and ARENA, meaning its size has now grown to 150 megawatts and 193.5 megawatt hours. So I know that one of your questions, Bella, sort of pointed to value. As an indication, there was an independent review done by Oricon after the first 2 years of operation at facility, which found that it had delivered over 150 million Australian dollars in savings to South Australian energy consumers. So it's something, we've got some really tangible results through the success of that facility. But it's not the only grid scale battery operating in South Australia. We've also got a 25 megawatt, 52 megawatt hour battery at Lake Bonnie in our Riverland, and a 30 megawatt, 8 megawatt hour battery near Stansbury on the Yorke Peninsula. So, we do like to think South Australia is the home of the big batteries, and certainly we're doing some really fantastic things in residential storage as well, which I'm sure we'll cover off on. To your question on room for more big batteries in the state, I think that's really a question for the market to answer. That's something that we're all keen to understand, and we're sort of grappling with every day. But look, we've seen announcements from the likes of AGL. They made a commitment earlier this year for the construction of a 250 megawatt battery at Torrens Island in South Australia. We know of Neoen's plans for a further 160 megawatt battery at Crystal Brook, and there are public commitments for a sort of staged growth of battery storage for up to 900 megawatts as part of Neoen's Goyden Renewables Zone project as well. So there are significant announcements coming thick and fast for additional storage in South Australia. So, I mean, these suggest that the market believes there is still room for big batteries. And I guess the big question for us and something that's emerging is really what additional capacity will come, or an opportunity for South Australia with the introduction of the new interconnector, which is under development between SA and New South Wales. So, we're super hopeful that we'll be able to export clean, renewable energy from South Australia right to the eastern states. So, yeah.
Well, indeed, I think you already did that earlier this month, which is, I mean, it's already kind of happening. And I was going to point out that there is already kind of a whole slew of other announcements. So it will be interesting to see how those kind of grid scale batteries unfold. So we're going to turn now to like the home battery scheme. So as I understand it, about 25,000 South Australians have already installed or approved to install a home battery under the scheme. One of the better known VPPs in the state is the Tesla one that is run, as I understand it, in conjunction with the government. How has the reaction been from the public, and how willing are South Australians to hand over control to their solar plus storage systems?
Yeah, look, another great question. We've look, I'd like to jump in there. We've just clocked over 26,500 residential storage systems. So again, we continue to grow and evolve those programs. But look, the home battery scheme, which was largely born out of a $100 million government commitment about 4 years ago, really enabled us to create a platform to explain the benefits of batteries and storage to homeowners, and helping them with their consideration and decisions around, was it right for them to invest in batteries and the like. So, the response has been incredible. Like, we've seen, tens of thousands of South Australians investing in, I guess, prosumerism to take control of their energy usage. Traditionally, South Australians have borne some of the highest costs of energy in the world, and we've seen a dramatic turnaround in that in recent years, with now recording regularly really the lowest wholesale costs across the nation. So, there are some significant opportunities and gains to be made for householders to invest in this kind of technology. at last count, from the 26,500 systems we've got installed, almost 8,000 of those have signed up to some aggregation platform or virtual power plant offering of sorts. So, I mean, that includes private homes that have invested privately through the home battery scheme, but also through our partnership with Tesla on delivering the virtual power plant. And so that scale now is sort of around 3,000 and growing daily of solar and storage assets deployed on public housing assets across the state. So I guess that's a strong indication that the South Australians are willing to offer up control of their battery to be part of something bigger. But I guess the biggest value that we see in the growth of virtual power plants is the kind of grid stability services that they can offer, particularly like frequency control and the like. And look, we're really proud to be working with Tesla on the SAVPP, who's has more than 50% of the capacity registered with AEMO through their VPP demo trials at the moment, and proving up some of the performance that these aggregated and orchestrated assets can play in the market. So look, we see that as critical, being able to derive value and monetize, I guess, revenue for performance for those services through distributed assets, and then seeing that being passed through consumers is really critical to continue to drive the uptake and the consumer trust, I guess, in that they want to be part of this transformation of the energy sector.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting kind of shift, because it kind of makes people much more active, and also kind of potentially gives people bills where they actually are earning money, which it'll be really interesting to see how these VPPs play out, especially with Tesla targeting 50,000. So that's a huge VPP that they want. So
yeah, that's right. I think just on that, we've got this great calculator on our website, and I guess from a government perspective, some of the assumptions we put in behind the calculator to give consumers an understanding, I guess, the kind of savings that might be entitled for. They are quite conservative, and what we are seeing in reality is consumers are saving, much higher and above and beyond what their expectations are through those sorts of calculators. So I guess I would encourage anyone out there thinking about it, do look into it, and do talk to, solar providers and battery providers in terms of what might be right for you.
Oh, that's fascinating. I actually didn't know that those calculators were a little bit on the conservative side. So that's great news.
Well, ours is.
So the South Australian government's approach, what has the South Australian government's approach been to ensuring safety and durability of these homes and battery systems that you're kind of subsidising?
Yeah, look, from day one, safety's been incredibly important to us through all of our programs. So we deliver a whole suite of programs, from grid scale through to residential scale, and so through the home battery scheme. So talking about the residential program specifically, we've introduced a number of safety measures in the design of that project. So firstly, there is a pre-qualification of the battery system itself, which the safety and compliance check is part of. We also check and for the system providers, the companies that can access subsidies on behalf of customers. So they go through an assessment process as well. And those companies, of course, also need to be Clean Energy Council approved. In turn means they need to be signatories to the CEC Code of Conduct. So I guess we've got lots of layers there to ensure both the providers that are supplying systems to customers under our programs are approved, and also that the actual systems that they are installing have a minimum level of tech and are safe and compliant to be installed as well.
Excellent. Okay, we've got a question from one of the viewers. Is South Australia able to operate as an island at all times?
It's not something we would like to do, but yeah, we have, I believe there was a period, again, it's at the start of 2020, I think, that we were separated from Victoria for about 2 weeks, and that really tested the state, but we did so quite successfully. So again, it's one of the reasons that we are investing and have committed to the second interconnector to the New South Wales is to provide that extra level of backup. So yes, it's possible. No, it's not something. It's something that we prefer not to have to do or be tested onto regularly.
Yeah, right. And you guys are kind of aiming to actually be exporters.
That's right.
Wonderful. Perfect. I actually think, unfortunately, that is all we have time for because we've only got you in until 5:20, but God knows what that is in everyone else's time zones. But thank you so much, Scott, for joining us. That was really fascinating, and it's great to hear kind of what South Australia is doing. It's such a, just such a pioneer, I guess, in Australia.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. It's been a pleasure. Good luck for the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Scott. All right, Scott Oster there, the Director of Major Projects at the Department for Energy and Mining in South Australia. Coming up in the next hour, Jonathan will be hosting our first panel discussion on how to make big batteries safer. Jonathan?
Thank you very much, Bella. And thanks for Scott. Good to hear about South Australia's progress and also their approach to safety, which is very much in focus throughout our event today. Once again, I do encourage you to get involved. We've had a few questions coming through. One question was, will a recording of this event be made public after the event? Yes, it will. And some of the presentations, almost all of the presentations, will also be made available to you afterwards. And I do encourage you to get involved in the discussion. Well, we've heard about some of the applications that batteries are being used for, and now let's turn to the market opportunities and also the supporting policies, both in the large scale and distributed market segments. Our first speaker in this section is Tristan Edis, the Director of Analysis and Advisory at Green Energy Markets. As an energy and carbon markets economist, he's been working for over 2 decades on initiatives to create a clean energy future across all sectors. A regular contributor to PV Magazine, The Guardian, The Australian, and other media outlets, Tristan's been an expert voice in the period of amateur theatrics that's been known as the Australian climate wars. Tristan, great to see you, and thanks for joining our event today.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Well, I'll hand over the stage to you and take us through some of the role for distributed batteries in the marketplace in Australia in 2021.
Thanks very much, Jonathan, for the opportunity. I'll kick over to my presentation now. So fingers crossed it all goes well. Let's get the thing doing what it's supposed to do. All right, here we go. So can we all see that presentation properly now, Jonathan?
Yep, absolutely. Perfect, Tristan.
Okay, great. So the topic of my presentation, obviously I'm not talking about anything to do with fire safety. That's for other people to worry about. But the key thing that I'd like to get across is in this presentation is why it's really the time. In fact, it was probably the time going back yesterday, really, why Australia must lead on residential batteries, and also talk about one possible way we might be able to do that. So just an introduction. Essentially, we're approaching serious constraints now, or we're not far from approaching significant constraints with the installation of solar. They're going to become increasingly significant over time. I'm not saying it's not like an absolute stop, but it is a thing that will steadily erode the economic attractiveness of solar over time. And to date, battery uptake has been too small, too modest to make a meaningful difference, and must be accelerated if we are to effectively harness further growth in solar generation. And this really, I'm going to concentrate on the NEM, but it's also equally applicable to the West Australian Southwest Interconnected System. My view is that the existing SRES scheme, that is the main support mechanism for solar in this country, actually could be modified to provide a fast and easy mechanism to encourage uptake of behind-the-meter battery systems that would be superior to the current rebate programs that are being run at very modest scale by state governments in some states. Look, I'll just move on now to where we're at now. Solar is no longer, a little bit plaything in the solar market, in the overall electricity market. It's a big deal. In fact, it is the main deal in the Australian electricity market. So our forecast, and these are the ones that we've produced, the most recent ones for the Clean Energy Regulator, are that essentially for the next few years we'll be installing around or a bit more than 3 gigawatts per annum each and every year. So 2021, we might have slightly overestimated that. Range of COVID restrictions in New South Wales and Victoria, we might not quite reach the 3,681 megawatts in 2021, but we'll get reasonably close. And the expectation is that the next few years are going to continue to add around 3 gigawatts based on our latest forecasts. So that is a big deal in the overall context of Australia's electricity markets. And to put it in context, what I've done here is shown, and this is just for the national electricity market, the East Coast market, the entire combined solar capacity. So all solar capacity is going to be about 30,000 megawatts by 2025, and more than double the installed capacity of gas-fired generators in the NEM, and about a third larger than, slightly less than a third larger than all the coal capacity that will be in place in 2025. So I've minus Liddell out of that figure. And most of that capacity is made up of rooftop solar. That's where the big game is here in Australia. So for those over listening into this webinar, we have a very distinct market here in Australia where rooftop solar is the predominant source of solar capacity. Almost the vast majority of that has been installed on residential households. So it's the big deal. Here it is in the big league. Now, back in 2018, to put this in a bit of context, the blue line there is the averaged electricity consumption by hour of day by quarter. And then the red was wind and solar generation averaged over those same time durations. And then I've sort of got 2018 Liddell coal-fired power station in there. So a big deal relative to 2018 Liddell generation, wind and solar, but a long way from approaching any kind of constraint relative to total electricity demand. But if we fast forward to 2025, the green line there is our modelled forecast of average time of day generation for the combination of wind and solar in 2025. And in the middle of the day, it's starting to approach a very large proportion of total consumption. And in fact, in Q3 and Q4, on average, in the middle of the day, wind and solar would exceed total consumption. So you'd end up with spillage. Now, the thing is, you'd end up with spillage anyway, beyond just exceeding consumption, because it's likely that AEMO, the system operator, will apply some kind of system stability constraints as well on the allowed output of wind and solar, I would expect. Now, the new CEO of AEMO has said he wants to strive to be able to support 100% penetration of variable renewables, but that's an aspiration rather than something that he can definitely achieve right now. He needs additional tools, or the organisation needs additional tools and technologies to be able to accommodate 100% penetration of wind and solar in the national electricity market. So we're not there at the present moment. And so it's likely that we'd need to apply some level of constraints there to ensure system stability of some kind, probably on the 2025 timeframe. So the constraints are probably more than just that blue line. It's probably a bit lower than that in terms of what AEMO will feel comfortable with doing, but hopefully they achieve their CEO's ambitious goals. Now, at the same time, what I've shown here is the price history for each mainland state in the NEM over time. So I've got 2015 there, and prices were quite stable. In 2020, we really see a noticeable depression in the middle of the day. And then I've overlaid on that, the red line is year to date 2021, I think up to June 2021. And what you can now see in the red line is this noticeable depression in prices in the middle of the day. They're now at almost record lows in inflation-adjusted terms. So they're now lower than 2015, which was extraordinarily low wholesale prices. We now see prices regularly below that in the middle of the day. So that's sort of the yellow, is that that solar depression is what we might call it. So we're already seeing the effects of large amounts of solar capacity, and there's an awful lot more to come. So that day is going to get even more severe. Meanwhile, though, in the blue, we still have this very noticeable and substantial spike in prices just a few hours later. So if we just could shift some of that solar generation just a few hours later, and only needs to be there for a few hours, then it opens up of exploiting this large increase in power prices in that evening period. So, and what you can see there is that evening period is a bit of a stubborn, frustrating thing, I think, for those of us who'd like to see renewables succeed in delivering low prices in Australia, is that price spike is noticeably higher than what we saw in 2015. So that is the opportunity for batteries, is to shift that generation out of the yellow and into the blue. So what out? Well, because if we want to have ongoing growth of solar generation and the greenhouse abatement that comes, we need energy storage. And the alternative is increased spillage and very low feed-in tariffs, which is going to undermine the solar market, our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's also important to exploit economic efficiencies from upsizing residential solar systems. So one of the key reasons that solar systems are so significantly in cost in Australia is because we have been able to progressively upgrade customers to larger and larger solar systems and take advantage of essentially the fixed costs of getting people to site and getting them on the roof can be offset over more modules and higher generation. And as module efficiency improves, we want to be able to install more kilowatts on people's houses to exploit the economic gains from that improved module efficiency. But you can't do that if you're going to hit constraints. So that's why batteries are important. And the other reason is, I suppose, an economic justification is that there's a first mover disadvantage for customers in installing batteries. First movers help to reduce costs for those that will come later and buy batteries later. They are generating what would be called in economics speak a positive externality. And that positive externality, there is a sound justification for that to be rewarded through government policy, because they are delivering a benefit to society by installing batteries while they are sort of early on the cost curve. And I think the other thing is, particularly focusing on residential battery systems, Australia has a very distinct solar market where it dominates in smaller behind-the-meter batteries. We also have a long, skinny grid with very high costs for our distribution network because of lower population density. And so we can really benefit from behind-the-meter batteries, and we can and need to lead in the residential battery space, I think. And the other thing is, we hear a lot from politicians complaining about reliability and how reliability is a huge issue. Well, if those people really did care about blackouts, they'd be focused on batteries at the customer site, because the biggest cause of network outages is not insufficient generation. It's not having a lack of coal. It's having failures on the network, on the distribution network. And batteries at a customer site are the best way to deal with that reliability issue. So if we want to deal with reliability, the best thing we can do is roll out batteries at behind-the-meter installations at customer sites. How do we accelerate that battery rollout? Well, I think we should use the existing SRES program, which awards STCs to solar systems. In Australia, most of you guys would be familiar with that if you're involved in the solar industry. And if the customer installs a battery system with solar, they would receive the original 15 years of deeming for STCs. Otherwise, if they don't install a battery system, then the deeming rate continues to decline for solar systems. Now, what that would mean in 2023, if you installed a typical 6.6 kilowatt system, then installing that system with a battery would give you an additional STC rebate benefit of $2,100. And by 2025, the difference would be $2,800. So that's a material support there for installing a solar system over just a solar system alone. Now, the minimum size of a battery system to receive 15 years of deeming, now this is just a starting point to spur discussion amongst people. This is not something that I'm wedded to or put a great deal of analysis into, but I would think that we need to specify, look, if you want to get the 15 years of deeming, you can't just install a tiny battery, or a certain minimum size, and that would be calibrated with the size of the solar system, because that would relate back to, one, people's probably their own electricity consumption and their ability to benefit from that battery system, but also the amount of exports from that solar system, and therefore you need a larger battery system to absorb those exports. Now, none of these minimum sizes would absorb all the exports from these those sort of size solar systems, but it'd go a long way to shift out of that middle of the day period and into that evening peak. And of course, this is just a minimum size. Probably be upgraded and upsold to larger battery systems, I imagine. That's the way the market would unfold. That's how it's happened with solar. And so this would just be a minimum to qualify for that 15-year deeming. Now, in conjunction with that, we need some controls around battery quality. So we don't want people going around and installing crummy battery systems so they can get 15 years deeming and they only care about the purchase price. And it's just really a rort to access 15-year deeming through installing a battery that doesn't actually do anything functional except help you get a rebate. So we need battery performance standards introduced along with a testing regime and a regulatory regime there. And those standards and testing, we've done this before with a range of other appliances. We've done it with incandescent, phase out of incandescent light bulbs as an example. And there's a range of requirements that batteries would need to meet in order to be eligible. And the other thing I think is important is there needs to be a maximum price set that suppliers need to fall underneath that price in order to be eligible. We don't want battery suppliers just milking this in high margins, and we don't see any improvement in volumes of batteries being rolled out. And we've seen other rebate programs milked in this way where they just up the prices. Now, hopefully we'd have a competitive market and that wouldn't happen. But as a safeguard against that, I think there also needs to be a regulator set price threshold that would set a maximum price that a battery could be sold for and be eligible for the deeming. And so I'll finish it up there. Look forward to the discussion.
All right, Tristan Edis, the Director of Analysis and Advisory at Green Energy Markets. Tristan, thanks so much for your time, and good to see the opportunity very clearly spelt out or illustrated, moving that that sag of the duck curve of the overproduction of solar in terms of grid requirements into the evening, and also a really concrete suggestion for how the STC program can be reformed. If you're involved with STCs, which I imagine a lot of us on this event today are, please let us know what you think about it. Join the chat function on this event. What do you think about Tristan's proposal as he set it out? It seems like it's pretty detailed and many of the aspects have kind of been mapped out there. But now let's turn our attention to the utility scale. As I said, Tristan has spelt out the opportunity and also policy reforms that can occur on the distributed level. But on the utility scale, our speaker is Marija Petkovic, the engineer turned entrepreneur behind Energy Synapse, a company that helps all stakeholders navigate the complex energy markets and organize themselves towards a clean energy future. The Energy Synapse platform allows clients to view over 150 renewable energy generation and storage assets on the national electricity market. Marija, welcome to Insight Australia.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. I'll just start sharing my screen here.
Fantastic, please do.
All right, are you able to see that?
We can. All set to go.
Okay, so listen, just a very brief overview about us. So we are an independent analytics and advisory firm, and at Energy Synapse, we really live and breathe wholesale energy and FCAS markets, and in particular in the context of large-scale renewable and battery storage projects. And as Jonathan mentioned, we've just recently launched a new software tool that really gives our clients an unprecedented view of what's happening in the energy market and the performance of every large-scale clean energy asset in the NEM. So a lot of the insights that I'll be showing you today do come from that system. So as many of you will know on the call tonight or afternoon, the NEM is going through the biggest transformation in its history. So at the moment, coal-fired generators produce about 65% of our electricity. But going forward, that's going to rapidly change. So just on the right-hand side of the screen here, this is from AEMO's integrated system plan. It's their step change scenario, which is the most aggressive one. And you can see a huge build out of variable renewables there, and that includes wind, solar, and rooftop solar as well. So this is shown in energy, but it represents about a build of 70 gigawatts or so, which is quite extraordinary. And then you can see coal really coming down rapidly as well. Now, this is AEMO's most aggressive scenario, but our own modelling shows that this is probably not aggressive enough. We see that coal is really going to struggle to remain economically viable beyond 2030. Now that probably sounds very scary to a lot of people, but in the next few slides, I'll show you why instead of trying to prop up coal and just prolong the inevitable, why we should be shifting our focus to better suited technologies such as batteries that will be able to really integrate this huge amount of variable renewables that we will have over the next decade. So when we think about what the NEM might look like in that very high variable renewable scenario, it turns out we don't actually have to think too hard about that, because South Australia provides a pretty good preview of where the rest of the grid might go. So, I mean, this is South Australia 15 years ago. It was a system made basically totally of coal and gas. And you can see coal there serving the base load, and that comes from having a high fixed cost, low marginal costs, and being relatively slow to start and ramp up and down. Whereas in contrast, then you had the gas generators, which were serving the peak demand and the intermediate demand in the market, and they have lower fixed costs but significantly higher marginal costs, and they're much quicker to start, and you can ramp them up and down a lot more easily. Now, of course, there are variations in these categories. So, for example, black coal does tend to be a fair bit more flexible than brown coal, and even in the gas world, things like fast start and open cycle turbines tend to be more flexible than, say, closed cycle turbines. But the main message that I want to get across here is that this paradigm that we used to have, which was baseload plus coal, that comes from the economic characteristics of these traditional generators. It isn't actually a technical requirement in the grid. So what is a technical requirement is that we need the demand for electricity and the supply of electricity to be in balance at every point in time. But the baseload plus peak model is just one way of doing that, and it's certainly not the only way. So this is what South Australia looks like now. So this is just a snapshot of about 15 days from this year. And on the left-hand side, you can see the total electricity that was consumed by households and businesses. So when you take away rooftop solar from that and you take away large-scale solar and wind power, what you're left with is the residual demand on the right-hand side. Now, as you can see here, there is no base load left in this scenario. This is not a pattern that coal-fired generators are able to follow. So for this kind of world, what you need is highly flexible, quick response assets. So at the moment in South Australia, most of this is being met by gas-fired generators and to a smaller extent battery storage. But as the rest of the NEM transitions to this paradigm, what we can expect is that this residual demand will be served by a portfolio of assets, and that will include large-scale batteries. It'll include small-scale distributed batteries and other forms of demand response. It'll include hydro and gas as well. But coal is really going to struggle in this world, and this is why it's not really worth trying to prolong the life of coal, because in a highly renewable grid, it actually provides very little value. And we should be focused on incentivizing these highly flexible resources that do. So when it comes to big batteries, I guess if you are a project developer or investor, what you're really interested in knowing is what's the value stack for this asset? How does it earn money? And one of the big differentiators in battery storage, and in particular, lithium-ion batteries, is that their value comes from the fact that they are very quick and have a very accurate response. Their value isn't derived from being able to supply bulk energy. And on this wheel here, we've got some of the main value streams that big batteries are able to tap into. Frequency control ancillary services, or FCAS. This is the dominant value stream for batteries, and why they're so good at capturing FCAS markets is because of that fast and accurate response. But there's certainly been challenges in realizing some of this value for batteries. Again, being such a novel technology means that a lot of the benefits that batteries are able to provide, such as fast frequency response and virtual inertia and system security, traditionally there haven't been markets for these systems. So even though batteries are able to provide these services, there hasn't been a mechanism to actually compensate them for doing so. So, we're really excited to see that the AEMC is bringing in their rule change in a couple of years' time that will introduce a fast frequency response market, but there's still some work to do on introducing hopefully virtual inertia and also other system security services as well. But then the other hurdle that's been in the market is that because batteries are so different to traditional power assets, investors have really struggled to understand the value stack for batteries. And in particular, the merchant value stack, so where you're not contracted. So when you're looking at, FCAS in particular and energy arbitrage as well, there's been a huge education piece to try to get investors to understand this new business model and exactly what the risks and opportunities are so that they can invest in an informed way in this sector. So just I just wanted to highlight some of the opportunities that are happening for battery storage. Now, Tristan showed a very similar slide. So this is South Australia from 2021. And as Tristan pointed out, you can see these really low daytime prices, but then very high late afternoon, evening prices. And this is really your arbitrage opportunity for battery storage, because you can charge up here when the prices are low and soak up all this excess solar and then discharge the battery when it's needed the most in the grid. So even though this opportunity is already seems to be quite huge in South Australia, I'll just use Hornsdale as an example here, and you can see even with that opportunity, this battery is earning typically 85% or more of its revenue from FCAS services. Now, all the large-scale batteries in the grid, they do have different portions of what this merchant revenue stack looks like for them, but all of them, they are earning, most of their revenue is coming from FCAS. And again, that highlights why batteries have been a bit of a scary, asset for investors, because this has been a whole new market that banks and other financial institutions are having to learn so they can evaluate these opportunities. And there's a lot of, very frustrated developers who are, waiting on the sidelines to get financing for their projects, and they're just watching, Hornsdale and these other batteries make an absolute mozza in energy and FCAS markets over the past few years, and they're still, struggling to get financing for their own projects. That's going to be a big hurdle that needs to be overcome. Now, one of the questions that we get almost on a daily basis from interested parties is understanding, where is the FCAS market going to go? Because the conventional wisdom is that these markets are very shallow, and as more batteries come into the market, it's going to eat the opportunity, and then the asset won't be profitable anymore. And people ask us quite frequently, does it already have enough batteries? Is the opportunity already gone? And the simple answer to that question is no, because yes, while these markets are shallow, the flip side of that equation is that as coal-fired power stations come out of the market and get replaced with more variable renewables, AEMO is actually going to have to start procuring a lot more volume of FCAS to be able to keep the grid stable. And what our modelling tends to show is that once you get to 40 or 50% variable renewables, you start to see these non-linear increases in the FCAS requirements. So we certainly see that there's going to be an ongoing role for these kind of services, and then especially when you take into account that there's potentially going to be new services coming on board, such as FFR and virtual inertia in the future. We believe that the revenue outlook for battery storage is very strong, and we're nowhere near filling that required capacity. And I'll just show you as well what can happen when coal decides to have a bit of a moment. So as you might remember, the Kalide coal-fired power station in Queensland had an explosion in late May of this year, and that cascaded to a whole bunch of other transmission issues and kind of other thermal outages in the grid. But you can see in the Queensland market there that the payments that AEMO made for raised contingency FCAS services just in those couple of months of this year was more than the last 3 years combined. And unfortunately, there's a couple of big battery projects that are just starting up in Queensland and have missed out on this particular revenue pool. But it really shows you how even with a lot of battery systems in the market already, you still get these huge opportunities. And we saw similar events in South Australia last year in Q1, when South Australia separated from the rest of the grid for about 2.5 weeks' time. As was mentioned by the earlier speakers, the batteries in the grid really made a mozza during that time. It was the biggest revenue that the batteries have received to date. So many opportunities going forward there. I guess my main message is that we certainly haven't filled that capacity and battery storage, both on the distributed side, but as well as large scale, needs, I guess, a lot more attention than it's been getting. So that's my presentation there, and I'll hand it over to you, Jonathan. I'll see if I can stop sharing here.
Okay, and while you're doing that, Marija Petkovic, the Managing Director, Energy Synapse, thanks so much for that. A couple of questions are coming through. We are running behind time, but I'll try and get to some. One question, Marija, are there solar farms and BESS, so battery systems, currently bidded into the market as spinning reserves? So I imagine that's the FCAS markets that you're referring to. Are there currently solar plus storage projects that have bid into these markets?
Yeah, so all the projects at the moment are registered mostly separately. But they are certainly, there's been, I know the Hornsdale wind farm that's dabbled in providing FCAS services, and of course all the large scale batteries, they're also providing FCAS services, and we're advising on several projects who are hoping to do just that. So having a combined asset, which will then, as the combined asset, bid into FCAS markets.
Okay, and one more question. Will competition between increased number of FCAS providers drive down the FCAS prices despite increased variable renewable energy? So I think you partly addressed that, but will there be continued downward pressure?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're your two variables in this equation. One's the increase in supply of FCAS providers, and then the other part of the equation is the increase in variable renewables. Now, over time, that will go up and down. And when you see, big exits of coal, that's when you'll kind of see a natural increase in the amount that's being procured. So while it does go up and down over the forecast horizon, overall, over the life, over the 10, 15-year life of a battery, FCAS is still a very important revenue stream. So we don't see that disappearing.
Okay, Marija, thank you very much for that. And the key part there, over the 10 or 15-year life of a battery, and we are talking about reliability and safety today. So I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for your time. Well, since 2015, PV Magazine has been hosting quality-focused events right around the world, and since 2018 in Australia. And real-world case studies have always been a big part of these events. But it's not about naming and shaming component suppliers, installers, and EPCs. It's about highlighting what we can learn when things go wrong. So when in July, fire broke out at the Victorian Big Battery, we thought we'd take a closer look. PV Magazine editor Blake Mattich was assigned the story, and he joins us now to deliver some of the things we have found out and others that we can learn from. Blake, welcome today.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm here to present a quick-fire case study of the blaze at the Victoria Big Battery, which was not a quick fire by any measure, and certainly caught global attention, serving as partially the spark for this focus of Inside Australia. As you can see from this timeline presented on the next slide, and don't burden your eyes by getting too close to the screen, because I'll be going through this day by day. The event did leak into literally leak into a fourth day, and this information will be provided to all attendees afterwards. But to get started on the first day, which was Friday the 30th of July, between 10 and 10:15 a.m., a fire involving one and then a second Tesla megapack occurred during the commissioning at the Victoria Big Battery, VBB. By 10:30, 150 Country Fire Authority and Fire Rescue Victoria firefighters and 30 fire trucks responded to the incident. The CFA and FRB respectively set up a 25-metre exclusion zone and commenced dousing the pair of compromised megapacks. Authorities then issued a watch and act warning for toxic smoke in the nearby areas of Batesford, Bellpost Hill, Lovely Banks, and Moorabool. As you can see from this bird's eye view here, this drone shot, and as Professor Christensen will probably touch upon in his presentation coming up, the colour of the smoke in regards to a lithium-ion battery fire is very important, and unlike the Vatican, white smoke is not generally a good sign. On Saturday the 31st of July, emergency authorities continued to douse the blaze, trying to stop the propagation to nearby megapacks. With the aid of drones, the CFA and FRV continued to monitor and contain the decreasing temperature of the concerned megapacks. And on the following day, 1 p.m. August the 1st, fire service ceased precautionary dousing and approached the affected megapacks to gauge surface temperature. At 6:36 p.m, authorities downgraded the toxic smoke warning from a watch and act warning to an advice warning, and that's for the suburbs of Bellpost Hill, Lovely Banks, and Moorabool as the air quality improved. As you can see from this next image, it's a pretty big battery, but Australia's a pretty big country, and ensuring we have adequate space between battery packs for emergency services to manoeuvre shouldn't be an obstacle, and we'll talk about that throughout the event. And then finally on Monday at 3:05, Monday August 2nd, that is at 3:05 p.m, firefighters successfully opened all doors to the container, and they were presented with no signs of fire. The incident was therefore declared under control, with fire crews remaining on site for the next 24 hours, taking 2-hour time interval temperature gauges in case of precaution against reignition. The investigation launched immediately after was a multi-agency investigation led by Energy Safe Victoria, ESV, with the cooperation of Neoen and Tesla, and the ESV published its statement of technical findings in late September. With the assistance of testing undertaken by Tesla, an examination of the scene by ESV, in addition to video surveillance and telemetry data, ESV findings concluded that the most likely root cause of the incident was a leak within the battery pack cooling system, that's the first megapack, that caused a short circuit and then a fire in an electronic component. This resulted in heating, leading to a thermal runaway event and fire in an adjacent battery compartment within the first megapack still, and then that spread to an adjacent megapack. As you can see from this next image, and by comparison to that ute at the bottom of the photograph, these are massive containers, and the fires, there's a lot of cells in there that take a long time to burn through. In conclusion of the ESV report, the fire could have most likely been avoided had SCADA and the relevant monitoring devices not being accidentally switched to an offline mode after that particular first megapack's duties in the commissioning process had ceased for the day. So, and that has been addressed in the lessons learned. But ESV's said that its learnings, including will be compiled by 2 independent groups, Energy Safety Response Group and Fisher Engineering, with a full report due in November. Energisation testing has now resumed at the VBB, and while the original November completion date is unlikely, Neoen has said that it is still aiming for the VBB to be operational in time for Australia's high grid demand summer. Now, you can see the ESV report linked to there, as well as various PV articles, including the feature I published in the PVI October print edition, which called Murable Burning, which if you're more interested in talking about it, and in the ESV report and its lessons learned, you can join me at my coffee table in the networking break. Thank you, and back to Jonathan.
Thanks very much for that, Blake. Some interesting takeaways from that event, and we'll actually be discussing it in more detail in our first panel discussion in just a few moments. Thanks for that, Blake. Over to you, Bella.
Right. Fittingly, our next speaker is actually one of the world's leading experts on lithium-ion battery safety. Professor Paul Christensen started his electrochemistry career at the University of Oxford before moving to the UK's Newcastle University. He's a senior advisor to the UK National Fire Chiefs Council, the UK government's energy storage governance groups, and he has strong ties to fire departments across the globe, including here in Australia. According to his research, there have been around 40 large-scale battery fires, most of which have been in the last 3 years. Professor Christensen is going to talk today about how these battery fires manifest and also take us inside the inner workings of a thermal runaway event. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much. I've learnt a new word. I'm not quite sure I know what it means, but I shall use MOTSA in future. And now we'll try and grapple with the technology. Share system. It's not actually letting me share for some reason. Yeah, it's not letting me share for some reason here.
Yeah, we're just quickly taking a look at that now, Paul. Shouldn't be a moment. There we go. If you can just talk us through the slides, tell us when you need a new slide and we'll move it on for you.
Okay, well, we can move on to the next one. So this is the history of lithium-ion batteries, but the key point, 2 key points, is that in terms of large lithium-ion batteries, they've only really come into being in the last really about 11 years, 13 years. And in real terms, actually, my belief is that the penetration of lithium-ion batteries into our society has far outstripped our knowledge of the associated risks. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of lithium-ion batteries. I really am. I think they're absolutely brilliant devices. But everybody needs to be educated how to use these devices safely. Okay, if we move on. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is actually also the reason why they're so great. They store an enormous amount of energy in a very small space. But if that energy is released in an uncontrolled fashion, for example, through abuse, through heating, penetration, or crush, then you can actually end up with fire or even explosion. Now, what the problem is that once the battery is abused, it becomes unstable, in other words, and it generates gases and heat. Now, the heat speeds up the chemical processes that are generating the gases and the heat, getting them even faster and generating even more gases. And the problem is that under normal operation, it's an electrochemical process. Electrons flow through the external circuit, ions through this inside of the cell. But when these chemical processes take over, anything you do to interrupt the ion flow or the electron flow will not have any effect. Now, the heat is produced exponentially, the red line, and it is dissipated linearly. Also, heat is produced throughout the volume of the device, whereas heat is dissipated only throughout the surface area. Now, there are two definitions of thermal runaway. The first definition is when you can see a measurable temperature change, typically defined as a rate of change of, say, 1 degree centigrade per second or 10 degrees centigrade per minute. But a far more, I believe, accurate definition is when these exothermic processes producing the gases and the heat become self-sustaining. And that can occur before the crossover, before you've got a measurable temperature change. Okay, if we move on. Now, when thermal runaway takes place and prior to ignition, the gases will vent. And when they vent, they produce a thick white vapor. And this white vapor can be mistaken for smoke, has been mistaken for smoke, or even steam. And it's white because it takes with it droplets of the solvent, the organic solvents. And typically it contains up to 30 to 50% hydrogen, a large amount of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen chloride, and hydrogen cyanide, all of which are pretty nasty. And small amounts, up to about 10% of methane and other hydrocarbons. In other words, it's a vapor cloud. Okay. And if vapor clouds, I think we want to go backwards. Sorry. Now, thermal runaway should be prevented by all the safety systems, and which there are, even in a mobile phone, there are many safety systems, including the battery management system. But fires and explosions are occurring on the land, on the sea, under the sea, and in the air. Okay, if we move on. So with particular respect to this conference, obviously we have various types of battery energy storage system, or BESS. We have the grid or industrial scale, and then we have domestic systems, both commercial and my own personal bugbear, do-it-yourself ones built from Second Life batteries. And the problem we have in the UK is that these domestic systems have absolutely no regulations governing them, and they can be quite big. If we pass on. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to go into all of these, but yeah, there's been over 40 fires and explosions involving battery energy storage systems since 2012, the first one in Arizona. But actually, there's been about 40 in the last 3 years. And certainly the big explosion in Surprise in Arizona in 2019 was a vapor cloud explosion, as was the explosion here in the UK last year in September, the Carnegie Road system. So, and of course, we've been talking about the Tesla Megapack, etc. And in Beijing in April, there was actually 2 firefighters killed and a 3rd injured. In the Surprise explosion, there was a number of first responders contaminated with hydrogen cyanide, and several were badly injured by the explosion. We move on. Now, there's been a lot in South Korea, but that's because South Korea has invested heavily and accelerated its move into battery energy storage systems. And there is a view that what happened in South Korea simply reflects what is going to happen in the West. And it is critical that battery energy storage system safety is taken very, very seriously, both at grid scale level and perhaps even more so in domestic systems. Move on. Now, the quite informative report on the South Korean incidents blame a number of failures in design, operation, human error, but they do manage to reproduce the failures by a combination of high humidity and common mode voltage or common mode noise. And that's very, very interesting and worth exploring. Move on. I do not believe that gaseous suppression systems work. And indeed, I believe they can actually facilitate vapor cloud explosions by delaying ignition. And we are now accepting that the gases that are coming off lithium-ion batteries contain some really nasty things like hydrogen cyanide, hydrogen fluoride, etc. This is from the UL 95408 test tests that were done by underwriters laboratories. Notice the gases coming off that battery energy storage system in the picture. You've got a thick white vapor cloud creeping along the floor, and you've also got a vapor cloud that's buoyant, and that's important. If we move on. So what happens? Your system is abused, or in fact, we have had spontaneous issues due to, we think, although we're not sure, manufacturing defects or contamination at the manufacturing stage. We get the thermal runaway, we get the gases and the heat. The gases vent, taking with them the droplets of the solvent to give a white vapor cloud. What also tends to happen actually first is the ejection of the cathode material as a thick black, what looks like smoke, but it's actually particles of heavy metals. If the vapor cloud ignites immediately, it's replaced by a thin fume, and you get flare-like flames. And then the plastics burn, giving you a black smoky fume. If the vapor cloud is not ignited immediately, not only do you have the toxicity issue, you also have the potential for a violent vapor cloud explosion, as has happened. We move on. So in a second, I'll tell you, has this got the actual video working on it? If you move the cursor over the picture. Yeah, okay. Stop it for the time being. Pause it for a second. If you can, bottom left on the picture. On the actual photo, on the actual film, if you do bottom left there, if you hit the pause button, you can move it back a bit. Yeah, move it back and pause it just for a second. All the pictures show the same kind of thing. So what happened here, we've got a hammer here, which weighs 23 kilograms, and it's got a nail on the end. And I don't know if you noticed, but when that went up, the hammer bounced several feet in the air. And this is a 1.7 kilowatt hour module, okay? There's 24 of these in an electric vehicle, 40 kilowatt hours. The cells are pouch cells, which are essentially glorified crisp or chip packets. I'm not quite sure what you say down in the Antipodes, but essentially they're just metallized plastic, yet you can see how high that hammer was thrown. That shows you the energy that's contained. Now, in this case, the flames ignited immediately. You can set it going again. If you couldn't take it back to the beginning, it would be best, and then just show it again. That would be great. Yeah, okay, that's great. Set it going. See how high it jumps, and you get the black particles, then 12-foot flames and debris and pieces of molten aluminium. Now, it doesn't matter what the abuse is. If we see flames or we see vapor cloud with thermal abuse, nail penetration, overcharge, it doesn't matter. If we move on, pause here, don't touch anything yet. This mimics a domestic system, not a big one either. There are 8 modules. As I said, there's 24 modules in a 40 kilowatt hour electric vehicle. Each module has 8 cells, 1.7 kilowatts multiplied by 8. Bear in mind that commercial systems in the UK run from about 2 kilowatt hours to 130 kilowatt hours. Now, if you start it going by pressing the bottom left on the picture, that'd be great. Now, there's only 2 cells going to go up in the entire film. So there's only 2 out of those 64 cells. Okay. And that film hasn't been speeded up at all. It's in real time. Now, if you could hear, you would hear a strong crackling noise. And that's still only 2 cells. Okay. So imagine that in the loft or under the stairs or in the bedroom, which I've seen these systems in the UK, by the way. Okay, if you move on, Right, don't start this yet. Now, we wondered what the crackling sound was, and this was experiments conducted at RAF Spadad on the DNV site in Northumberland. And if we start the film, you'll see shortly what was causing the crackling noise. Lumps of concrete were being explosively delivered by the water in the concrete, explosively vaporizing, and they were being projected 20 or 30 meters and also 10 meters in the air. And this is why in Germany they've banned electric vehicles from the parking houses, because they accept that they can't put them out. They just have to try and control the gases, etc. And they're worried about the structural integrity of the buildings. We'll move on. So what happens if the vapor cloud does not ignite? Now, this again is a nail penetration. It's again just a 1.7 kilowatt hour module. Bear in mind that, as I said, commercial systems here in the UK run from 2 to 130 kilowatt hours. This is just under 2 kilowatt hours. If we started going, we estimate there's around 700 litres of gas per kilowatt hour. So you're looking at about 1,000 litres from this module. That's the particles of the cathode coming out, the heavy metals there, the black stuff. This is the vapor cloud. Now, this vapor was mainly buoyant. What we've found is you actually get, in all cases, you get two types of vapor. You get a heavier than air vapor and a lighter than air vapor. We're not quite sure what regulates the relative amounts of these two, but we think it's something to do, for example, with the chemistry of the lithium battery. Again, imagine that in the loft, under the stairs, or whatever. And after a few seconds, we actually start seeing the heavier than air vapor that comes off, which creeps across the floor. We were actually trying to detonate this to create a vapor cloud explosion, but we were below the lower explosion limit, as it turns out, which is between 6 and 11%. And now you can start seeing the heavier than air vapor. When the module finally ignites, it sucks all those gases back in because they all burn. Okay, moving on. This is an example where a different chemistry generated heavier than air white vapor. So in the previous case, the vapor filled the sea container from the roof downwards. In this case, it filled the sea container from the floor upwards. Moving on. And vapor cloud explosions are not confined to large battery energy storage systems. There's been one in a boat in Sneak Harbour. We've also had one involving an electric vehicle in the UK and a fire blanket. That was because the fire services didn't realise or didn't understand the hazards and risks associated with these things. So if we now move on to your own CSIRO, of course, we're well aware that you're streets ahead of the UK in terms of solar energy. I had an Australian colleague who looked up at the sky here in the UK and asked me what that white thing was that gave out light and no heat, which is the reason why we're somewhat behind in photovoltaics, I think. Anyway, CSIRO were worried about people backing into their domestic systems. So they did a test with a pneumatic tow bar traveling at 10 kilometers an hour. Again, if you touch the bottom of the picture, it will start the video. Initially, you get the heavy particles, the heavy metal particles from the cathode. Then you get the vapor cloud, the white vapor cloud. And then you'll notice there's a small ignition source starts there. And rather unexpectedly, there was a vapor cloud explosion, which blew the sides off the container and stopped the research completely. We move on. Final point, I have appraised a number of grid scale planning applications for grid scale battery energy storage systems, 50 megawatt hours, 30 megawatt hours, etc. And I have been astounded and appalled by the lack of understanding of the risks and hazards associated with lithium-ion batteries. If granted, these planning applications would result in the potential harm to firefighters and local residents. Just no appreciation of the safety issues involved. And also, I just want to mention another personal bugbear that I believe is a huge elephant in the room of energy storage is second life batteries. The safety of second life batteries, and also the transport of and sale of second life batteries. Anyway, I'd just like to thank you for your kind attention, and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. Could you turn your camera back on, because we've actually got a whole bunch of questions for you. And I wanted to kind of kick things off because you've sparked a lot of interest. Those were fascinating videos that you showed, by the way. Thank you so much for that. So the first question, because we're running behind schedule, so we'll whack through these. One of our viewers said, in Germany, we have regulations for home battery energy storage safety, as well as regulations for the battery cells and on the system level. Is this sufficient? And then, just because we're talking about Australia, I wanted to ask what you thought about the draft regulations here in Australia, particularly in regard to keeping home battery systems outside.
Right. First of all, I think that the regulations, etc., are not sufficient unless they include the requirement for a gas sensor. Now, that's particularly with reference to inside the house. However, I am a major fan of Australia and New Zealand's approach to battery energy storage, particularly domestic battery energy storage. Keep the damn things out. Don't put them inside the home, okay? And that, I think, is the best approach. And I am creating almighty merry hell in as many places as I possibly can to try and get our own government to do something about this and to move them outside of the home. The problem is, of course, we've got many, many systems that are already installed. Up to 50% are in the loft. A recent certification, out of 3,000 systems, 3,500 systems, 50% were in the roof space, and which causes fire and rescue services major problems. 5% were under the main staircase. This is a big problem, even more so when it's do-it-yourself systems. These should be banned. And also, I believe the trade in second life batteries online should be banned now. Otherwise, I've got no strong opinions, you understand.
They sounded like some strong opinions to me. I'll just ask you one more before we go. Does the chemistry of the battery affect the vapor emitted? Is hydrogen fluoride always emitted?
As far as we can tell, yes. The chemistry that often people believe that the lithium iron phosphate batteries are safer because the cathode structure collapses at higher temperatures. But as you found out during the Nathan campus battery energy storage system explosion, which was an LFP, and of course to their great cost in Beijing, they found out with the explosion on top of the shopping mall that killed 2, there is an increasing suspicion that perhaps all it does is delay ignition and facilitate explosion over fire. But as far as we can tell, the DNVGL report on the surprise explosion made the statement that, in broad terms, all the gases that I quoted are produced by all current lithium-ion batteries at the present time when they go into thermal runaway.
That's fascinating, because you also had a question about LFP batteries and whether they were safer, and you actually answered it all by yourself. So thank you so much, Professor Paul Christensen, Professor of Pure and Applied Electrochemistry at Newcastle University. In about an hour, we'll be speaking to Susan Deadman, who will give us some of the latest results about the ITP Renewables battery testing program and what they've found out about the performance and reliability of distributed batteries on the Australian market right now. So that will be really interesting. But for now, I'll pass it back over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Bella, and some terrifying videos there from Paul Christensen, and definitely very true. With new technologies, or relatively new technologies, regardless of their virtues, there are a lot of risks that are unknown, and we're going to address those risks at the utility scale in our next panel discussion. And thank you for everyone who is sending through questions. We'll be getting to as many of those as we can, and also feeding them through the discussion with our panelists today. So don't hesitate to send through your questions using the chat function on this event app. And as I said, new technologies generate a lot of interest, but they can unfortunately generate some fires and some pretty bad outcomes when it comes to battery energy storage systems, as we've just seen. So let's discuss this, particularly in light of the utility scale segment and what we can learn from other renewables and more mature industry segments like large scale solar. So we've got some veterans of the large scale solar industry, and also we'll have some insights into battery chemistries that may potentially be safer. We've got a great panel. Our panelists are Marija Petkovic, an Alfred Deakin Research Fellow from Deakin University, Ben Macias, Vice President Sales from Shoals Technologies Group, and Eric Ast-Comoli, Head of Global Business Development Alternative Energies from Stäubli Electrical Connectors. Hello, Eric. Hello, Mega. And hello, Ben. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Jonathan.
Wonderful. Well, I've got 2 out of 3 at the moment. Hopefully, Ben will be joining very shortly. Eric, I'll put my first question to you. We've seen some of the testing that Paul Christensen and his team have been performing. We've also seen that track record of some fires, including in Australia with the VBB. From your perspective, having been in the solar industry for many years, particularly supplying electrical balance of system components, what do you think we can learn from solar and apply that to large-scale battery energy storage systems?
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a very good question, obviously, and it was very interesting because Paul's presentation was excellent. And what we've seen is that when you started to have like this thermal runaway event, is very similar that what we've seen with conduct resistancy on a connector level on DC system is when this was increasing, then it starts increasing even more exponentially until you get like a fire event. And this is something that we typically see on PV system. It has been very similar. I mean, it has been a learning curve for the PV industry as well. Either the components quality, but then for sure also the system level and system design.
Yeah, okay. So you're saying the mechanism, this resistivity, can actually lead to failures down the road?
Yes. So what we see is that we do have a special technology called multi-lam in all our connectors that makes sure that the contact resistancy remain stable over the lifetime of the product. And in with renewable, we expect this or those assets to work and produce energy for 25 years or even longer. And what we typically see is that when contact resistancy start to increase, it's generating heat. At some point, you achieve, let's say where the materials, the raw materials, the plastics and the different raw materials and being part of the product come to the limit, and then you typically see a fire event or problem with production and output of energy. Typically.
Okay. Now, but in solar, one of the virtues is that it's perhaps the fires don't get quite as out of control as we've seen through some of those videos from Paul Christensen. Do you feel the stakes are higher when it comes to battery systems?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, making this discussion even more important. Marija Petkovic from Deakin University, I'll bring you into the discussion at this stage. Now, we've seen the experiments on those lithium-ion cell technologies, and Ben has joined us from Shoals Technologies. Thank you very much, Ben. I know it's an awful time of the very early morning in the US, so really appreciate you joining us.
Oh, good. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, loud and clear, mate. Thanks again. Marija, I'll come to you straight away. Let's talk about battery chemistries now. What is the outlook for perhaps safer electrolytes, or we've even seen the kind of smoke that can be generated from the cathode material in those experiments. What would you say, how promising are some of the newer or more novel battery chemistries that you're working on?
Thank you, Jonathan. I think from what I work with, we're looking at 2 parts in the battery. One is the electrolyte component, which, as Professor Christensen mentioned, all these toxic gases that leak out, for example, ethane and carbon monoxide, and all these that come out from the conventional electrolytes when the battery gets overheated. And these electrolytes are comprised of carbonate-based solvents. And what we're trying to do at Deakin University in Melbourne, we're trying to work with moving away from these organic solvents that tend to be quite volatile and quite flammable. So we're trying to move away and work with non-volatile and flammable, non-flammable solvents that, when overheated or at high temperatures, they can take these temperatures. They don't easily break down. They don't react with the cathode, which currently in lithium-ion batteries is cobalt oxide. Which, when it breaks down, also releases oxygen. And when all these systems react together, this is where you have these combustions. So we're trying to move away from cobalt oxide-based cathodes as well. We're trying to work towards less reactive metal batteries such as sodium. Sodium batteries currently are quite a hot topic. It's much more safer than lithium, but we can still maintain very similar chemistry as lithium, but also work with safer electrodes.
Okay, and can you give us a kind of outlook? I know in the research community it's always tricky to say, but how promising are some of these alternatives in terms of commercialization?
Oh, I think it's very promising because, as I mentioned, say, for example, with sodium, it's much more abundant, and the materials that we use to derive some of the cathode materials and anode materials for sodium, and not just sodium. Of course, now there's also flow batteries coming out with, the vanadium flow batteries, the zinc bromide flow batteries. These are much cheaper as well. So, it makes it quite easy for manufacturing purposes to be able to source something that's more abundant and not as rare as cobalt or lithium. Means that it's much more affordable even for developing countries, around the world. So I think all these, the chemistry has already become, and it's not going to be long before we start commercializing some of these batteries.
Jonathan, we cannot hear you. Huh? I think you're.
Oh, there we are. Sorry, that was the classic. After so many months of lockdown, one would imagine you get used to unmuting oneself, but I was wrong. But it does look promising. Mega, thank you very much for that overview. Ben, bringing you into the conversation, the Vice President Sales from the Shoals Technology Group. You can also bring us a US perspective. Shoals is working on a heap of projects throughout the US and, of course, globally. But is lithium-ion still the predominant technology? Mega has spoken about flow batteries and these kind of things. From your experience and Shoals as a group, is lithium-ion still the major technology for large-scale applications in the US?
Yeah, that's what we've seen for a majority of our projects here in the US. There's some flow batteries as well, but the predominant has been lithium-ion.
Okay, so there is that technological momentum behind lithium-ion. And we have seen some kind of worrying videos from Paul Christensen. I think they were pretty hard to ignore. Eric, at the start of our conversation, touched on some of the learnings from solar in terms of component safety and how the resistivity that can be seen in electrical balance of system components is not dissimilar to what occurs with battery systems. What's your approach in terms of delivering quality components, and how can that be applied to batteries?
Yeah, it's super important. Shoals, prior to jumping into solar 18 years ago, was a tier 1 automotive manufacturer. So if you know automotive, it's extremely rigorous quality standards, high volumes, and zero margin for error. So it's really imperative to conduct testing for reliability and quality before a product is released to the market. It's not as simple as taking a bunch of OEM products off the shelf, throwing a design together in a model, stuffing it into an enclosure, and releasing it to the market. So we need to make sure that we're doing proper due diligence before a product is deployed in the field. A good example of this is a DC combiner box in a solar project. So some certification entities don't require you to utilize a real fuse to obtain certification, and you're allowed to utilize copper milled blanks and fuse holders. So when you perform a static heating sequence test at 50 degrees C ambient, you'll have full current, but you won't have any thermal heat rise from the fuses. So the box passes. But now you take that same box, put in a real world application, current, real fuses generating heat at 50 degrees C ambient temperatures out in the field, and it's a whole different result. And it fails because it wasn't designed and tested properly. So for that reason, that's why we're hyper focused on providing safe, reliable, and quality products that, you know, we don't turn our clients' projects into testing fields.
Yeah. Okay. So what can occur out in the field can be very different to what occurs in the lab. What about for installation then, Ben? Because we saw with the VBB project that it was still really in the installation phase when the fire occurred. You know, how can you kind of take safety measures to ensure that mistakes don't occur not only in the factory when the components are being made, but also in installation?
Yeah, that word shows up quite a bit when I look at taglines of many owners, IPPs, construction companies, installers. Safety. That should be #1 priority, not cost or speed of installation. So, you know, you look at these projects, installers are getting less and less time to install these projects. If you look, you know, at a 300 megawatt solar project today, they're doing that in under a year, whereas, you know, a couple of years ago, they were, or maybe even 5 years ago, those were taking 2 to 3 years to install. So installers need to be a lot more efficient with their time while not compromising, you know, the quality of their installations. So for storage, there's a lot of energy densely stored in these containers, and with one small installation error, it could lead to a catastrophic thermal event. So for that reason, from an installation standpoint, slow and steady wins the race, and getting it right the first time.
Okay, and what about then training and working with installers and the construction partners?
Well, I think it's super critical. I think it's also critical to have proper QA/QC testing procedures in place, and you know, test, retest, and test the retest. That's how important this is. You know, pre-assembly of as much components as we can do in a factory controlled environment versus in the field to reduce failures or human error is super critical.
And Eric, do you have something to add to that? You know, with connectors, it can be pretty simple installation errors that cause big problems.
True, but you know, at the very beginning of the solar era, a lot of the connectors were installed in the field manually. Yeah, and now we see companies like Shoals, EBOS companies doing a full assembly in their facility under QC controls and providing really high quality. So it's very important, as mentioned earlier, that you select the right product, the right components, but then also that the system is designed properly. This is really a key element that we've gone through, and I think it improves a lot, but we still see some markets, some regions where a lot of work still need to be done, and it's really then in making installers' life easier at the end of the day, because we start to see plug and play solutions, and you don't have any surprises then in the field. So I think this is really the next steps that the industry has to take on, and this is very valid for the battery industry as well.
Okay,
yeah,
well,
Jonathan, I just want to add one point in there. You hear pretty frequently, at least on the component supply side, you know, I want it fast, cheap, and good. And unfortunately, you can only have two of those, right? Because you can have it fast and cheap, it probably is not going to be any good. You could have it fast and good, but it probably won't be good quality. And you could have it good and cheap, but it probably won't be fast, or it won't happen anytime soon. So it's super critical to not compromise safety over a race to the bottom to provide a solution.
Yeah, and race to the bottom in terms of speed, in terms of price, and all the factors. Now, Eric, in the VBB case study that we saw presented by Blake earlier, we heard that the investigation revealed that the cooling system had a role to play in the failure. I know that Stäubli, the wider Stäubli group, has activities, I believe it's through the fluid connected division in terms of cooling systems. Were you able to refer back to your colleagues and find anything out there?
Yes, we had the chance to look at that, and basically, so our FCS division, Fluid Connector division, is pretty much involved in cooling system for large data storage system, but also batteries. But it's not really electrical cooling, and those industries are pretty much ahead of the kind of battery we see today. It's more like fluid cooling system, and this is really also something that we know some of the battery players, some Korean companies, and some other players in this industry start to implement into BESS and especially the utility scale battery as well.
Okay, well, and we heard right at the start of the presentation that from Bill Johnston from Western Australia, the energy minister there, talk about the importance that batteries are able to operate in very high temperatures as well, because of course, Australia is a pretty sunny place and there are deserts. So these cooling systems are very much going to be put to the test. Okay, that was more of a statement than a question, but I do have a question from one of our attendees. Over to you, Mega, on this one, Mega Carr from Deakin University. Why not other zinc bromide flow batteries as alternatives? Is that a chemistry that you've looked at with safety in mind?
Yes, absolutely. Zinc bromide is already starting to be commercialized. So it's already out there for large scale, stationary grid systems. So I think there's a lot of work being done here already in New South Wales with the zinc bromide, and zinc being also very abundant, cheap, and but as everyone in the panel agrees, it's also much safer to use. So I think there's a lot of potential there to use these systems. They do use large volumes of electrolyte, which is something to keep in mind. But obviously their operating voltages are not as wide as lithium-ion batteries. So that's always been a challenge, but we definitely can get a lot of energy out of these batteries.
Okay, and another question, I think also for you, Mega. This is someone describing themselves as a novice to the sector. Why did we start with the lithium-ion compared to some of the other alternatives that you're talking about?
I think one of the reasons is that, as I mentioned, you do get a larger operating voltages out of lithium-ion. It's the energy density essentially that comes out. We get lithium is much more energy dense than some of the other alternatives that I've mentioned, such as sodium. So, we're talking about over a 4.2 volt battery, which means the wider the operating voltage, the higher the energy output of these systems. And this is going to be a challenge with some of the other alternatives that I have mentioned. But again, it's a balance between having that as well as introducing safety, cost. So it's not just going to come down to the energy density, but also all these factors. And this is why I think now people have really started looking at alternatives. And there are ways to push this energy density of alternative batteries such as sodium, in which case, the electrolyte's going to play a big role to, overcome some of these challenges.
And another question about the cost comparison between sodium and lithium batteries at the moment. Do you know how that kind of pans out?
I don't actually know what the cost is. I know it will be much cheaper, sodium, because there's lots of it available around the world, and some of the materials used in sodium batteries, we think today, for the anode and the cathode, are also available from, biomass and organic materials and the feedstock. So this is why we think that the price of sodium-ion batteries will be much lower than lithium-ion batteries.
Okay. So on a material basis, there's a lot of promise. Okay, Ben, one question saying that you're emphasizing that battery safety and BESS safety, so kind of system safety, are slightly different issues. Is that right?
I think the key word there is safety. Just making sure that we do things the right way and keeping everybody safe. Much parallel to what we did over the last 10 years in solar, right? We went from 600 volts to 1,000 volts to 1,500 volts in a matter of 5 years. And so at that voltage, safety is of the utmost importance, and the same thing can be said on these systems. So takeaway there is safe.
Sure. And we heard also with the VBB that the SCADA system, there was some kind of setting that wasn't on right at that stage, and that's how the fire kind of got out of control. How would you, maybe to Ben or to Eric, how important then a kind of safety instrumented control systems to reduce vapor cloud explosions and thermal runaway of lithium-ion batteries? What do you know about in terms of those kind of safety systems or monitoring systems that can detect potential fires and failures? Gentlemen?
We've seen that being more and more implemented in the solar industry, and also standards have come, like in the US with rapid shutdown, or specific way to measure the performance of the system is really something that is coming also. It's important here again, and what Ben mentioned, and I think it's key, especially for utility scale project, if PV or with battery, is that when an investor or an asset owner, they want to avoid any unplanned issues afterwards. So everything that could be planned, anticipated, budgeted when developing and doing the project is then fine, because then you're sure it's not going to impact the return and the yield of the system. So I think this is key, and anything, if smart technologies will help to achieve those goals, and make sure that you achieve the business case of your project, and anything going in this direction might be appreciated by investors and asset owners, definitely.
The business case, and also keeping people safe. Ben, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what I said earlier on just having the quality aspect incorporated in there. From our standpoint, we design the main power paths from the batteries to the power converters. So we do it with a very conservative design guidelines, and we're always trying to mitigate risk in terms of thermal risk. And it's keeping that thermal aspect under control is going to be important as we move forward.
Thermal monitoring. Okay, Megakar, and give us a kind of closing statement to this panel discussion. What would you say in terms of the outlook for safer batteries? Should we be really worried by Paul Christensen's presentation earlier?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. And I think we should use the most of what's out there from all the different types of batteries that I've talked about, different energy storage systems. We shouldn't just simply rely on lithium-ion batteries, and if we do, we should really be looking at ways to improve it from the electrolyte point of view, from the cathode point of view. We're lucky that the Victorian Big Battery system was in a very remote area, so that households and areas were not affected largely, but it itself is quite a big concern, and we should really be thinking about this, especially if people are to use these as home batteries as well.
Thinking about safety on the chemistry level, the cathode level, but also the EBOS level, and right down to the component. I think that's an important message. Thank you very much to the three of you today, Megakar and Alfred, Deakin Research Fellow from Deakin University, Ben Macias, Vice President Sales, Shoals Technology Group, and Eric Ast, Head of Global Business Development, Alternative Energies with Stäubli Electrical Connectors. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Well, Bella, you've joined us again. What have we got coming up?
Well, we're going to have a networking break right now, but after the break, we've got Alka Hoekstra, the EV debunker-in-chief. We'll also hear from Christina Pozo-Gonzalo, who's heading up really fascinating research being done at the Deakin University again. And we'll also have a bit of a closer look at insuring battery projects. Jonathan?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Bella. And I do encourage everyone to keep getting involved in the discussion. There is the networking features on this event app. You can join an instant one-on-one networking with other attendees, or you can join one of the coffee break tables. And our colleague Blake Mattich, as he said, is hosting one of these. So you can drop by and say g'day. And we'll be back on the main stage in about 10 minutes or so with one of the gurus of renewable energy. Alka Högstra will be delivering our keynote address, and I'm delighted to have him a part of the event. Thank you for joining Inside Australia, and come back in just a few moments.